Von Miller returning to Denver as the Broncos are exercising a 6th-year option. He'll be paid $18 million with $7 million of that money guaranteed. Von Miller at one point was facing some charges, and it was unclear whether or not Von Miller would be on the Broncos by the end of this season, and he was, and now he's re-signed. Those charges were dropped, if I remember correctly, so happy for Von Miller that he gets to stay and receive the last of his contract. He's getting a little bit older, so maybe the Broncos will try and re-sign him at some point within the next year. But as it is right now for Von, really happy that he's back there with the Broncos. That's been his defense for years. It doesn't feel right if Von Miller isn't in a Broncos uniform. Great for him. Sidney Jones is staying in Jacksonville on a league minimum deal. Sidney Jones, the 4th, the cornerback. Great deal for Jacksonville. They need help at the cornerback position badly. We talked about this recently in the Front Office Frenzy segment. The defensive backcourt for the Jaguars was battered, bruised, and pretty bad last year. And Sidney Jones came in and he played a decent season when he did come in. So great for the Jaguars to kind of lock him up for another year. They're going to get him very cheap. They don't have to spend a lot of that the calorie space. They don't have to spend a lot of that salary cap space on a cornerback. It would be good if they did, but they're going to have at least a decent cheap option at the very least there. Good signing by Jacksonville. Dalvin Tomlinson is leaving the New York Giants and is signing a 2-year, $22 million deal with the Vikings. The Vikings desperately needed run defense help. Tomlinson is a big defensive tackle with some good penetration ability. He had 8 tackles for loss last season. So that is going to be, along with Michael Pierce, he's going to be another big body in the middle of that defensive line. Great signing by the Vikings. Now they're going to have to address the other need on the defensive line, which is finding a good edge rusher. They tried Unique Ngakwe in the middle of the season. They decided to trade him away as well. Danielle Hunter is returning from injury. So that defensive line is going to be better, but they could probably stand to get a few more depth pieces and get another edge rusher. So I'm sure that the Vikings aren't done with their defensive line in free agency. Carl Lawson is leaving the Bengals to sign with the Jets on a 3-year, $45 million contract. Carl Lawson is a defensive end from the Cincinnati Bengals. The Jets let go of Henry Anderson, who was a massive disappointment. We talked about that last week or the week before in terms of him being a complete disaster on the football field after, they gave him a pretty big contract coming off of a good year. So the Jets have let go of Anderson, who actually signed with New England today as well, and they're bringing in Carl Lawson. I don't necessarily know if Lawson is exactly what the Jets need right now. They do have some developing defensive ends on the roster already, like Jabari Zuniga from University of Florida. The Jets, if you had to point and say, okay, what position group on the Jets is probably the strongest? I would say the safety position with Marcus May, who got an extension, and I would probably also say the defensive line. The defensive line was probably the best part of the Jets defense last season. And they're adding another defensive end, and I think they probably could have spent their money elsewhere. They do have a lot of money to spend, but I think they probably could have spent some money elsewhere and maybe got a mid-level signing on the defensive line. So I don't know necessarily if the money allocation is correct here for the Jets. Carl Lawson is a fine player. I mean, he did have 32 QB hits last season, so he was getting to the quarterback. Even if his sack total wasn't anything incredibly impressive, he was getting to the quarterback and getting him down. So we'll see whether that signing really benefits the Jets or not. I think they probably could spend some money elsewhere. They do have a lot more money to spend, but sorry, my throat is getting a little scratchy at this point. We'll see if this signing is going to pay off for the Jets. Bud Dupreeh signs a 5-year, $82.5 million contract with the Tennessee Titans. Now, I have some feelings about this one. It's a deal in which Dupreeh is getting $35 million guaranteed with an average salary of $16.5 million a year. Dupreeh is coming off an ACL tear from week 12 of last season and is coming from a system in Pittsburgh in which he's lining up opposite of TJ Watt, and it's a system that was incredibly blitz heavy. They blitzed all the time, and even with TJ Watt getting double teamed for a majority of the snaps on the defense, he still just averaged some mediocre numbers. and he was more or less unimpressive. He had 2 really good seasons after his first 2 seasons in the NFL, and then he kind of just tapered off a little bit. And with the return to some mediocre numbers, and also in tune with the ACL tear that he received this past season, I don't know that this was necessarily a good signing for Tennessee. This is a very risky signing for the Tennessee Titans. And sure, the Titans needed some rushing badly. They needed some pass rushing rather very badly, especially if Jadeveon Clowney decides not to stay. But I don't think that this signing was it. I think they probably could have found a better player at a better price who is less risky. Sure, Bud Dupreeh can absolutely prove everybody wrong and come out with one of the seasons that he had a couple of years ago where he was 23rd best rusher or pass rusher in the league or something like that. He could come out and he could have an incredible season, but I just see this as a risky signing by the Titans, and I know that they desperately needed help on the pass rushing side of things, but I don't think that this was it. Ryan Fitzpatrick leaves the Dolphins to go to Washington on a 1-year, $10 million contract. As a Dolphins fan, I am sorry to see Fitzpatrick go. I know that, apart from my biases as a fan, I can't be biased on the show, so I'll have to be cut and dry here. This is great for Washington. You can expect probably a pretty similar season to the one that he had last year in Miami, and that's probably some of the attraction that Ron Rivera and the Washington football team had to Fitzpatrick. They're very similar football teams in terms of where they are organizationally. Just like Miami had this past season, good young defense, or Washington has this season, good young defense, young team, young quarterback is going to need mentoring. And whether that's Taylor Heinicke or that's Mac Jones coming out of the draft, regardless of that, Fitzpatrick, having just went through an almost identical season in Miami, is going to be perfect in Washington. I think that's a great signing for Washington, and even if Fitzpatrick is the starter in Washington, you are going to be able to get at least 8 wins with Fitzpatrick. That's pretty much the benchmark, and with that young defense in Washington, they could probably get more. Obviously, it's not that big of a deal. I've said this ad nauseum on the show over the past couple of weeks. It's the NFC East. Washington is going to be the best team in that division, regardless of what happens. Now they've just really secured their quarterback position a little bit more. Corey Davis leaves the Titans to join the Jets on a 3-year, $37.5 million deal. $27 million guaranteed in the first 2 years. A very front-heavy contract, which is weird for this day and age in the NFL. A lot of deals are very back-heavy, but this one tends to be front-heavy. I think they're banking on, or I guess maybe they're adjusting for the reality that Sam Darnold might be back this season and then not back the following season, as in they're going to get a quarterback at some point. And it would be really beneficial for the Jets to have a number 1 type receiver like Corey Davis and then not have to pay for him as harshly in the last 2 seasons of his contract. That's probably the idea that they're moving forward with. They're kind of adjusting and planning just in case that happens, but very front-heavy contract for Corey Davis. It's a good signing if you're looking for, weapons to give whoever the quarterback is. It gives Darnold a number 2, borderline number 1 wide receiver that he hasn't really had since probably Robbie Anderson left in free agency a couple of or last season. Rob Gronkowski re-signs a 1-year deal. The band is continuing to stay together in Tampa. Basically, Tampa went on a re-signing spree, and that's a lot of what Tampa Bay has done so far this offseason. Nobody has really went to Tampa Bay. It's a lot about keeping the team together, which is ideal for them. This was a newer one. Chidobe Awuzie, cornerback for the Cowboys, now heading to Cincinnati on a 3-year deal. Those details were undisclosed. This was one of the last ones that I put in my notebook before recording the show today. I don't know if any details have come out about that contract since then, but that was the last one that I saw, and I couldn't really write any notes on that. Not sure about what this does for the Bengals. Not sure about what this does for Awuzie. He had an okay season. It was along with a very troubled defensive backcourt for the Cowboys, so we'll see how that develops over time. Leonard Floyd getting paid in Los Angeles. the Rams re-signing him to a massive $64 million contract. It's expensive, but worth it. Especially to keep that defense together. As long as Aaron Donald is there, Floyd will be able to succeed because Aaron Donald gets double-teamed and triple-teamed, and he still gets to the quarterback. Leonard Floyd is a fast, agile linebacker, great pass rusher. It's a very expensive deal, but it's going to be worth it to keep that defense together for the Rams. Unique and Gawkway Signs with the Raiders, 2 years, $26 million with $21 million guaranteed. Another multiple million guaranteed contract. This will give Ngakoue the chance to be the featured rusher in Vegas, but truthfully, the Raiders needed defensive back help very badly, so hopefully they will get a big-name guy in the up-and-coming days. Corey Linsley heads to the Chargers with former teammate Brian Bulaga and is now the highest average paid center in the history of the league. 5 years, $62.5 million, $26 million guaranteed over the next 2 seasons. The message is very clear: protect Justin Herbert. Good signing for the Chargers. Jason Verrett remains in San Francisco on a 1-year deal. Big win for San Francisco to lock him up for another season. He's your best cornerback. San Francisco had a lot of defensive backs enter free agency this season. Great for San Fran that they could lock him up and keep him there on a 1-year deal, probably with the idea of extending him next season. Shaq Barrett returned to Tampa Bay, 4 years, $68 million extension. Levante David staying as well on a 2-year deal. So again, the nucleus of the Buccaneers defense is re-signed and staying. Rob Gronkowski re-signed. Tom Brady re-signed. It looks like Tampa Bay's just re-upping and reloading for another run next year. And then finally, out of the big signings, Aaron Jones re-signs with the Packers, 4 years, $48 million. Look, I'm not the highest guy on Aaron Jones, but if there's one thing that we've learned about the Packers over time is not only that they need a good defense and be able to succeed, but they also need something of a running game. It can't just be the Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams show. So at the very least, in the system that he's in, even though I don't know if Aaron Jones is necessarily the best running back in the league and deserves, to be paid that much money, $12 million a year essentially, at the very least, you're going to get some similar product to what you already have in the system that you already have, and it's been very difficult for Green Bay to find consistent running backs. Eddie Lacy was up and down when he was with the Packers, so you're going to keep him there. You're going to keep the status quo. Aaron Rodgers needs something of a running game to kind of take the weight off of his shoulders, so in that aspect, it's a good signing, even though I'm not as high on Aaron Jones. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this segment from the Hard Headed Sports Podcast. You've heard what I've had to say, now I'm interested to hear what you think as well. If you enjoyed this highlight from the show and want to watch more highlights from the show as they come out after the show's completion, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel, and if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all very soon.